Hello and welcome to part 2 of our analysis of iCAT11, which is part of our All India National Level CAT test series for CAT 2018. In the first part of our analysis, we had a look at the verbal ability section and concluded that it was easy to moderate in a moderately difficult mock. We also saw that anywhere close to 16 to 17 attempts would have had been a good performance for that section. In this part, let's have a look at the DILR section in greater detail. So as we saw in the first part, the overall mock has been classified as a moderate mock with an average difficulty per question being around 1.8, where 3 corresponds to tough and 1 corresponds to easy. Comparatively, the DILR section had an average difficulty of 2.16. So obviously this is significantly higher than the overall mock itself. To compare this with the actual CAT, you can note that the difficulty of DILR in CAT has been mapped somewhere around 2.2 to 2.25 by our experts. So this was slightly simpler compared to the actual exam, but for a mock this was at par, so as to say. Broadly, this can be classified as a moderate to tough section. Now, how do we analyze DILR compared to VA? In VA, we saw that the RCs need to be identified on the basis of not only subject matter, but also word length, number of questions, and then the difficulty level of questions. In DILR, one part of the analysis is fairly straightforward because you have 8 sets with 4 questions each. So the standard benchmark for clearing the cutoff in CAT is somewhere around 4 sets. That's 16 questions. If the mock is simpler, you can go up to somewhere around 19 questions. That's 5 sets. If it's difficult, you can somewhere go to 12 to 13 questions. That's a little more than 3 sets. On the whole, anywhere from 3 to 5 sets is what you should be looking at. So the average figure for most standard mocks would be close to 4 sets. So the key part of identifying or analyzing a DILR section is to identify the top 4 sets that should have been attempted. Let's have a look at the sets which were given in this mock and see how we could have identified the top 4. This graph here maps the average difficulty of the section versus the average difficulty of each set in this mock. You can see very clearly that at the halfway stage here, after the 4 mocks, there is a very pronounced high and low. What do I mean by this? This is, if you observe, this is an exact replica or exact mirror image of the DILR section of iCAT12. You have 2 extremely difficult sets here, which obviously by the nature of their difficulty should not have been solved. At the same time, you have 2 very simple sets here, which ideally should have been solved only, I'm talking only in terms of their difficulty. On the other hand, when I look at the first half of the mock, there is 1 tough set here on a rectangular table, which could have been skipped, whereas the remaining 3 sets are either easy to moderate, moderate, or slightly above moderate. So here you could have exercised a choice and said, I want to attempt 2 out of these 3 sets. However, looking only at the difficulty may not give you a complete picture. When you look at these questions, you will realize that it was not very easy to attempt 4 sets completely. So there was a case where you might have had to identify 4 good sets and attempt as many questions as possible within those sets. What do I mean by this? Let's have a look at the individual difficulty of each question in the sets and then the sets themselves. So, like the verbal section, when we map the individual difficulty of each set, we observe, as we said, that the set on 3 clocks as well as the set on mixtures were very tough, so both of them could have been skipped. However, I would still say that if somebody were to try this and be able to solve this set, the first, the identify the weights of each of the mixtures, he could have done the first two questions of this set and then left this set totally. Similarly, if I look at the set on the rectangular table, it is moderate to tough with the first two questions being tough. So here, if you've been able to solve this, the rest becomes easy. But this would have taken a lot of time. Look at the other questions. A set which has an LOD structure like this implies that you would have needed a lot of time to solve this. But had you solved this particular first question correctly, everything else would have been a cakewalk here. Using the same logic, you can note that in the set on Genghis Khan, you could have solved the first question, understood the logic, after that everything becomes easy. The set on logical conditions, where you had a team and a coach had to arrive at some kind of a batting sequence, obviously because it was logical conditions, it would have had conditions everywhere. So it on the whole remains a moderately difficult set. Here I put a question mark simply because a lot of people are not very comfortable with logical conditions. That is where when I say that these are the must-do sets, I have rated it as a or set as an alternative because a lot of people may not be very good at it. If you look at these must attempt sets, these two that I first noted, the single table on population, as I'll show you, was definitely a doable set. The caselet on Genghis Khan was something that looked difficult but was essentially a time speed question, so it was doable. Now when I look at the other two sets, I said logical conditions was good for somebody comfortable with it, but not so good for somebody who struggles with conditions and if-then statements. There was another set on averages, a single table on average marks in each section. So the first understanding of this set was tough. Then you had a couple of easy questions, followed by one more tough question here. So again, had you cracked this set, it was still likely that you might have been able to do only 2 or 3 questions. But if you did not have the understanding or the skill level to try this, you could have definitely solved this set. Finally, coming to a set which is classified as above moderate. But if you again notice the structure, you have a tough first question, which means that you need some time to solve this, followed by uniformly moderate questions, which means you solve this, you get all of this right. That is the reason I have marked it as a must-do set. So if I were to say which were the 3 sets that you should have definitely tried, I would say the one on population, which I'll just show you, then the one on Genghis Khan, and the 3 set Venn diagram, where you could have done 3 to 4 questions. The 4th set could have been either the table on average marks or the logical condition set on the cricket team. This way, if you look at it, it was very likely that you could have got 8 questions from these 2 sets here, potentially 3 questions here, and potentially 2 to 3 questions here. So essentially 14 questions from 3 to 4 sets would be a reasonably good performance as far as this particular section is concerned. Let's have a look at the actual questions to get a better picture. Let's look at this first set. Now firstly note that this has 2 numerical entry questions and 2 MCQs, but none of the MCQs have a cannot be determined, or none of the MCQs are conditional in nature, which means that you will be able to find all the data which is missing here. Now what is the data given? Sorry, my bad. Yeah. So it says the population details for 5 states of a country are given. The total population of state C is 4 times the illiterate population of state D. So here the total population of B is 5 times the illiterate population of E. Female literates and male illiterates in state E is 5:1. So here you need to use these ratios and this to get your overall populations. What is the kind of data given to you? I have literate population as 140, The illiterate population as a percentage of total is 30%. So the literates are 70%. Now if I know that the literates are 70%, I know that my total is 200. Literates are 140. Illiterates are 60. Now male literates are 60. So I can further break this down into male literates as 60, female literates as 80, and female illiterates as a percentage of total illiterate population is 2/3. So if the total illiterate population is 60, the female illiterates is 40, the male illiterates have to be the rest, that is 20. So the total number of, it's MIL and FIL for illiterates. So the total males will be 80 and the total females will be 120. So you'll need to make a table. Right now I have used 2-3 rows here, but you'll need to make a table spreading right like this on your scratch pad. If you do this systematically and use these 3 clues, you'll be able to fill this complete table for all 5 states. Once you do that, you get your answer. When you look at the other sets, you'll realize that this set is worth spending 15 minutes, because if you do that, you are assured of full marks from all these 4 questions. Let's look at the next set that should have been attempted, which is the one on Genghis Khan. But before that, let me show you a trap set. I said that the second set, which was a figure on rectangular arrangement, was tough. Now this is, why do I call it a trap set? You have a rectangular arrangement actually shown to you. There are 3 women, 3 men, they sit around this table, everybody's facing the center. And then there are clues. So it looks absolutely easy. But there are 2 aspects here. One, every question has a cannot be determined. The 4th question has a lot of additional data where people are interchanging positions, then people are rotating chairs, and then there's something else happening. Also, when you solve this set, you'll realize that there are multiple cases being formed. So while this is a very good set to be solved at home from a practice perspective, in the exam scenario, when you start entering into multiple cases, you realize that you're running out of time, and that might end up creating a lot of panic. So if at all you want to try this set, it would be good to try it probably towards the end, when you have already attempted 2 to 3 sets and assured yourself that you have solved at least 10 to 12 questions correctly. Let's look at the next set. So I said this was an optional set where I have a single table for 3 sections. So this says that the table below shows the average marks obtained by IIT and non-IIT students in 3 sections. So the same data is given for 3 sections for 7 different iCATs, 1 to 7. So it's the same data across 3 sections for 7 mocks. The breakup of IIT and non-IIT students that took these 7 iCATs was different from test to test. But across the 7 iCATs, the total number of students that took each test remained static at 100. So here the total was always 100, but the number of IITians and non-IITians would vary in each test. Each CAT had only 3 sections, each section had 25 questions, and each question carried 1 mark. There were no negative marks. So there were 75 marks in all that were possible. The average marks here would be, let's say if there are X IITians, then 10X, 14Y, I know that X plus Y is 100. But here every time this will keep changing. So you need to take this into account for each mock and then arrive at the answer. It is doable, but again in an exam scenario, a lot of students may not be very comfortable understanding this data. That is precisely why I have kept it as my 4th option to be attempted. If you are comfortable, definitely this is a set that can be solved. One other reason why I said that this set is something which should be solved last, here. Again, as you can see, 2 questions out of 3 cannot be determined, and in the 4th question, there is a lot of data given again without any options. So that would put me off from solving this question in the actual exam. I have marked this next set as something this should be solved, where I have 3 set when. So here, if you look at the questions itself, you know that your when will not get filled. What is the maximum possible number of placements? Which of the following can be the number of candidates? What can be said about the 3 statements? And that is conditional. So again, this is a slightly tough set, but here in when you know what you need to do. So you can make that set, and you can or actually make those 3 sets and arrive at the answers. If not all the questions, at least 2 to 3 questions. The set that should actually have been solved here was this one on Genghis Khan, where we say that there is some extra data given. The important part of this data is here. He tells all his 10 members to escape. The outpost is in the middle. There are 4 ways to escape. So there are 4 directions. And there are speeds given and a break given to him. And then it says, assuming that in 60 seconds the outpost will be hit, in which direction should Kimchi and his men move to have the maximum chances of survival? Chance of survival is directly proportional to the distance from the place of impact. So then, taking into account the speed and the halt times, you need to find the maximum direction that these people can travel in 60 seconds. That will be your answer. A man traveled towards the west for 70 seconds. How much time would he take to cover the same distance if he were traveling towards the east? So pure time and distance. You know the time, you know the wait time, so you know, and you know his speed, so you'll know what's the distance that he's traveled. Use that, take the speed for the east and solve. Similarly, you can solve all the other questions like individual time distance questions. So this is more a caselet, which is a time distance caselet than anything else. This next set that I classified as tough, and here when I said that the first 2 could have been solved, observe that here all my questions are numerical entry questions. That's point 1. The second and third questions have a combination of profit loss and a lot of extra data, so that makes it difficult. But if you solve the first part where you have weights of different granular mixtures and you get this, you'll be able to answer the first question. But if just for the first question spending 15 minutes to get the answer does not seem like the most appropriate thing to do in the exam. So this is definitely a set that should have been tried at home, but definitely not in the exam. Looking at the last set here, we have Coach Fletcher deciding to sort the batting order. There are 5 regular batsmen, and then you have these conditions. So here, based on the conditions, you can create a batting position. Now here, for instance, the very fact in which position will Thornley bat, and you do not have a cannot be determined, implies that his exact position can be determined. You can start from that particular data point and then start creating your sequences. So again, this is a set that should ideally be attempted, but for that you need to have prior knowledge of conditions and if-then statements. If you do that, this is a fairly doable set. So on the whole, if I look at this mock, while the individual questions within the mock may not be very difficult, there are certain sets within this section which were actually difficult, and some of the easier sets also had a combination of easy and moderate questions. So here the number of sets that you could have attempted would have actually gone down, or the number of sets would be more or less constant, but within them you might not have been able to attempt all the questions. That is why, in spite of this being a moderate to tough section, your overall good attempts would be a little lower at around 14. In part 3 of our analysis, we'll have a look at the quant section and then have a look at the total attempts for this mock. The previous analysis and analysis for all the earlier mocks are available on our official YouTube channel, which is given in the link below. You can subscribe to the channel by clicking on that link. Hitting the bell button will allow you to receive notifications every time a new video is put up. You can also put in your comments, questions, feedback on the thread below the video. Keep watching. Wish you all the very best and thank you.